So in this video I'm going to show you how to replace a starting chain. So there might be various reasons why you want to replace your starting chain. It might be that you've done it too tightly or too loosely. You need to, in my case, I need to change the colour because this is my Max Volume Granny Stitch Cowl, and what I've discovered is because these two colours are such contrast, when I come to join my cowl, the joins are very visible because of the contrast between two colours. So I actually want to switch this starting chain to be black. But as I said, there might be various reasons why you need to switch your starting chain. I've actually had to do this before, where I was crocheted a top where it started from the bottom up, and my starting chain was much too tight around the hips once I'd finished the top, so I had to take out the starting chain and add in some spaces. So obviously this is a very specific stitch we've got here. We've got a granny stitch cluster, but in theory you could adapt this technique that I'm showing you now to quite a lot of other stitches. So anyway, the first most important thing we need to find is the start of the round. So locking stitch marker into this is not actually the start of the chain. The start of the chain is actually here. Actually, you can see the tail end there. It started to come undone. Because when we come to undo the original chain, we're going to have to be very careful. We can't really unravel it. We can unravel part of it as you would a normal chain, but then this end that's forming a stitch, we want to unravel it reverse, so that we don't actually undo this chain 3 that's counting as a first stitch. So let's pop the stitch marker. So the important thing is with this start is to work out where the actual start of the chain was. So the start of my chain was here, and I've obviously sewn that end in to secure it. And if you have already sewn the end in and you're unsure about where this all is, I'm probably actually going to just have to cut this at the point where it starts, because I started my chain and I worked along because I'm working in the round, and then I'll come back around here, and then part of my chain is making up this cluster. So these 3 chains here, I'm going to have to be really careful not to undo those, because I don't want to undo the start of the round. Fortunately, when you try to reverse undo a chain, it's quite difficult to unravel it. So in some ways we're quite safe that that's not going to come undone, but I'm just putting that stitch marker there just to make sure, because when I've replaced the chain, I'm going to have to cut this. I'm probably going to actually cut a couple of chains before here, and then unravel everything the right way around, and then reverse unravel the last couple of bits of chain till it forms a little knot, so that I'm not going to accidentally undo my work. So that is the start of the round. So obviously with this, it really depends also on your pattern and what the instructions of your pattern are. For this, we actually start off with an empty chain 2 that represents one of these chain 2 spaces. So you might need to modify this technique based on whatever your pattern says. Start with my slip knot loop. That should be enough sewing in, and then I got a chain 2. This chain 2 is going to represent this little starting bit here. I've just accidentally tightened that because I was talking and looking at the camera screen. Now, every time, because I've put a 3 double crochets or 3 UK trebles into the 3rd chain of this foundation chain, I'm going to need to actually slip stitch into the base of these these clusters. So this is the bit you have to really be careful of. You need to get your hook and make sure that you catch all the strands of these stitches that are on this top side of this chain that you made. So obviously those stitches went around one leg of that chain, so I need to make sure I catch all of them. So this is the only bit that's a little bit time consuming, you have to be quite careful. And then I'm literally just going to loosely slip stitch, being careful that it goes all the way through. And remember, slip stitch, we're just pulling it all the way through. And then I'm going to revert back to pattern, just chain 2. And this is quite a loose chain 2 for this particular pattern because I need it to match gauge. So, and then I just carry on doing that all the way along. I'm being really careful. So for each double crochet or each treble here, you've basically got two strands on this top side that you need to pick up, and then loosely slip stitch chain 2. So just keep checking as you're going along that you're still matching the gauge of your original piece, or indeed if for some reason you're replacing it because the original gauge of your chain was not correct. Maybe you needed to add a chain or take a chain out. I'm actually slightly worried that this is a little bit tighter. Might actually just put in an extra small chain there. So again, this is something, there's a little bit of nuance here depending on what you're trying to achieve, because this slip stitch that you're making through the base of these stitches can sometimes have a slightly tighter gauge than what you did previously. So it's a bit of experimentation and very carefully making sure that I'm always picking up all of these strands. So let's have a quick look how that's looking. Yeah, I think I definitely do need the extra chain in there. So I'm now going to go ahead and do this. I've got a lot to do because this was starting chain is like more than 100 chains. Oops, I've missed one there. Definitely don't want to miss. I know I haven't. So I got 2, 4, 6. So that's what I'm going to be keeping an eye out on this particular pattern, is that every time I working into the base of these clusters, because I've got 3 doubles, each one has got 2 strands, so I just got to make sure I got 6 strands on my hook. So that's 2, that's 4, that's 6, and that they are the right side of that. So I've actually put in a chain 3 instead of the original chain 2 rather, just because that slip stitch I'm putting in replacement of the chain is working out a little bit tighter. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and I'll meet you back when I'm ready to pull out my original chain. So I'm coming back to the start of the round, and again I'm just being really careful to catch two strands of each stitch, and that includes that I've got a bit of a chain here, counting 3 chains, counting as the first double crochet or UK treble of this cluster. So I've made sure I've caught 2 parts of that chain 2, last slip stitch, and then I've got a chain section here which is going to fill that gap, I'm actually just going to put one more chain there just to help secure that a bit. And now I'm going to fasten this off, leaving a tail end for sewing later, because I'm going to join that together to make a sort of continuous chain as I did at the start. Right, I'm now ready to undo this original chain that I did. So what you've got to take note of here is you've got to take note of where you started. So the start of my chain is here. It's actually attached into this part of the sort of last bit of the chain, because I obviously worked the original chain from this direction round until I got to there, and then I started this way. So it's actually, I'm not going to try and, although this very first one here, if you can actually, if you haven't sewn the ends in, and you're able to easily just undo whatever you did here, then that is obviously the best option. I've actually done a pretty good job of sewing this in, so I'm actually just going to have to go ahead and cut that, but being careful not to cut the this side of the chain. So I'm going to cut there and then undo the bit that where I've sewn it on. Get rid of that. Done a very good job of sewing that in. It's actually woven in a bit, so I'll just leave that for the minute. So obviously it's not really possible to reverse undo a chain from the start, because you end up just making little knots, which is great for this end but not so great for doing a large section. So I'm actually going to just move along 2 clusters. So what I want is to leave a bit of a long enough tail. So this bit here I'm going to reverse unpick each bit to make sure that I don't unravel, because I want it to, every time you reverse unpick a chain, it obviously makes a little knot like that. I actually do want it to make a knot right at the base of this cluster, but the other part of it I want to undo it quite quickly. So then I should be able to just undo the rest of the chain just as you would a normal chain, apart from the fact that it's every couple of chains it's going through. And as you can see, where I have replaced the chain, those are really nice and secure, because I made sure that they caught all the correct parts of that double crochet cluster. So I'm going to unravel this chain so I can pull it, but I've still got to sort of, occasionally you might come across a bit of a snag where it's either like there, it's sort of felted a little bit to itself, or you might have accidentally crocheted. Here I've done a big section all in one go, but then I've still got to pull these bits out. Anyway, this bit's pretty straightforward. I can rip that straight back to the start here, and then we'll sort out this little beginning bit in a minute. So I'm going to go ahead and undo that, and I'll meet you back in a sec. So I'm back to this almost at the end here. I did actually have to cut it again because I'd managed to actually crochet and catch some of the strands, but it doesn't matter, it's all good. So far it all looks like I've managed to catch every single stitch, which is brilliant. Let's have a quick double check. It's all looking very secure and good. So that just leaves this very first bit. So you're going to need your tapestry needle, and then you're literally just going to unravel chain by chain and you want to stop at that very last chain at the base of this. So this is where I've sewn at the beginning, when I was at the end, I mean last, when I finished that round initially, right at the beginning, I've sewn that in. Right, so that's that out, so that's good. This is why it's actually better not to sew your ends in until you're completely sure that you're happy with what you've done. But that hole sort of bothered me, so I sewed it up quite early. So when you're reverse undoing a chain, you literally just have to do each section individually. Okay, so then that's the last chain I've undone there. So I can take out this stitch marker and I can just pull that gently. So that's not going to come undone, but obviously I still want to secure it, so I got a bit of a tail end there, and I'm just gonna weave it with a running stitch up the chain 3 there, that's counting as a stitch. How's that looking? Not bad. Gonna run it back down and catch that little loop, and then maybe run it back up the middle. So I have gone a bit overboard there. I've done three stitches up into that cluster, just to make sure that that very first cluster is definitely secured, and at the same time I also caught in that slightly baggy stitch that was left from the chain. So that is all good now, that's not going to go anywhere. And now I can finish off this original starting chain here. So I can use either end. I could use that end or this end. I think I'm going to use this end because it's got a little bit more thread there. And I just want to secure it here by going into this very first chain, just like my hook would go front to back, and then back into that little knot where I fastened off. And then I'm not working into this chain, actually I am. I'll be working into, for this particular pattern, I'll be working into the chain where each cluster's in, but it depends on your pattern where you're going to sew this end in. I am actually just going to do a bit of a running stitch along the chain, making sure I keep the same gauge and making sure everything matches, and then I just go back on myself, catch something in and do a running stitch back the other way. So that's that side sewn in, and then I'm just going to do the same for this end. So this part is actually not going to be that visible, so I'm not 100% fussed about how this looks, as long as it's at a glance it sort of matches the rest of the chain. Right, that's done. Let's have a quick look at what this is looking like. So there we go. I replaced the chain that was this sort of white and pink colour with a black chain, so that when I come to do one more row of black and I join it onto here, I don't get a very obvious markings where I do my join as I go.